going to go back to Alexana here in just a moment. Our next tasting is from Alexana, and again we've got a Pinot and a Chardonnay, and we're going to be speaking with Charles Hessen. He is the Director of Hospitality at Alexana. So just a little blurb about the winery. Ideally situated in Oregon's Willamette Valley. Alexana is an 80-acre property. It's an incredibly diverse series of soils and exposures, give it sort of a lot of variety as far as climate and soil. And so I guess they said 18 soil types spread over a combination of rolling hills, steep slopes, and rugged terrain make it a really interesting property. Again, a lot of sort of ecological diversity, and we'll hear more from Charles. And I think Charles is on right now, so transition to Charles and hear the story of Alexana. Zach, I think if you can unmute, and it's Samantha's link, or maybe Zach has to unmute. There you go.
So welcome to Alexana. Jason, are we going to do the video first?
Yeah, I think we can play the video right now if you'd like to do that. That's probably a good sort of intro for the property.
Okay, and then I'll cover if there's anything I think that they missed.
Absolutely. Zach, can you trigger that video? Thank you.
Hello to our friends at Solar Oregon. I'm Jeff Lewis here at Alexana Estate in the Dundee Hills. We are honored to be part of this year's Solar Oregon virtual winery tour. And I just want to tell you a little bit about this property here in the Dundee Hills and our team's approach to sustainability and how solar is incorporated into this overall program. I'm standing in front of our 55-acre vineyard here in the Dundee Hills. It's a dry farmed vineyard at the very northwestern edge of the Dundee Hills. So I'm standing here at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we are facing southwest. We have an incredible afternoon sun exposure. And to capture some of that energy, when they built the winery in 2011 and 2012, they wanted to be able to offset some of the electrical needs from our hospitality and offices. So we actually installed a 10 kilowatt hour solar program on top of the production facility directly behind me. And that is one component of our approach to sustainability. Another huge part of it is Vineyard Practices. You know, directly behind me, this is an 80-acre property. We only planted 55 acres as a component of maintaining an equilibrium within our environment. So there's a lot of old Oregon heritage oaks on the property that have been left intentionally as a source of native yeast that we use for our ferments here in the vineyard, as well as being dry farmed, not needing to use excessive water, saving 26,000 gallons per acre per year in water usage. Another component for us was the winery itself. When it was built, is LEED Gold certified building on the hospitality side. Just trying to be conscious of how we approach this incredible piece of property and how we can maintain taking care of it for generations to come. And this all comes from the founder, Dr. Ivana. I've asked him to put a little message together to tell you a little about his own personal history and a little bit about Alexana. And I think when you hear about where he's from and how he was raised, you'll understand how important taking care of the land is to him. So thank you again, and we hope you enjoy this tasting and some beautiful wines, and hope to see you out here in the Dundee Hills to enjoy this incredible property. Take care.
Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Madar Ivana. I'm honored that you have chosen our wines for tonight's virtual dinner. I just to give you a little bit of background. I came to the United States a little over 40 years ago from India, South India. Got my postgraduate training, cardiology training, moved to Houston, Texas. That's where I still live, practice cardiology. I started wineries a little over 25 years ago. Just to give you a little brief history of that. The first one is Napa Valley, bought a little over 10 acres of unplanted property in St. Helena, hired some of the best people and planted that vineyard, and that's Rivanna. My second is just where we are standing here. It's beautiful Alexana property, Rivanna Vineyard in Dundee Hills. This is an 80-acre property. You can see it, how beautiful it is. My third property is in Argentina, Uco Valley. First trip to Uco Valley was 2008. Met some amazing people. I was absolutely breathtaking at the foothills of the Andes Mountain. I thought I should have a little vineyard. Started that. So let me tell you a little bit about my story, where I grew up, how I came to the United States. I was born in a little tiny village in India, in South India, near Bangalore, which is Silicon Valley of India. So I was one of the 10 people, 10 kids, siblings that were born, and I was fortunate enough that my family wanted me to go to college. One of my brothers got stuck in the village, is still there taking care of the property. That farm is amazing. We still have it. It's been with our family for centuries, and we have mango trees, coconut trees, and papaya, all kinds. As a child, I used to climb coconut tree all the way, pick coconuts. And our mango trees is beautiful. It occupies acres, the best mangoes in the world. I used to climb, sit, and eat mangoes. I used to go in small little rivers, go and swim with my friends. That's how I grew up. It's beautiful, childhood. So some of my friends encouraged me to come here and visit. It so happened I met Lynn Penarash in Houston. She was there for a market visit. I asked her if she would consider making some wine. She said yes. I came over, started looking around, and happened to find this beautiful property. I bought it in December. You couldn't see anything. You had to walk with your boots on. It was all rainy, wet. And I knew that, even in the Dundee Hills, you couldn't go wrong. You're the best appellation in Oregon. So I decided to buy the property and planted about almost 56 acres planted, mostly Pinot Noir, 11 different clones. We have a little bit of Chardonnay and Pinot Gris. Built this beautiful winery, completed in 2012. Gravity flow. So I hope you come and visit. Enjoy this place. We make great Pinot Noirs here, some of the best. Anything we can do for you when you visit Napa, Oregon, or Argentina, please let us know. Again, enjoy. I wish I could be with you tonight.
Wow, that was great. I really enjoyed that. Charles, give us a little more personal texture on what we just saw and what we'll be tasting.
All right, that's hard to follow up. So you met Jeff Lewis, who is our Director of Education. Jeff is an amazing young man. He's had his own restaurants already. He was actually working in Argentina at a resort that we are situated with, and the president of our company, John Gabelhausen, who runs the wineries for Dr. Rivanna, he met Jeff and decided we had to hire him. So Jeff went back and forth between Argentina and Portland for several years. And then a couple of years ago, John, the president, decided Jeff was too valuable to leave in Argentina. So he brought him here, and he lives now full-time in Portland. And we don't get to see him every day, but he's an amazing individual. If you ever need recommendations in Argentina, he still goes there. and he has a lot of connections, and we'd love to help you out as far as drivers, hotels, whatever you need in Argentina when we get to travel again, which is going to be soon. And then you met the amazing Dr. Ivana. Listening to him on the video, that's more than I've probably ever gotten to talk to him. I loved hearing that. He doesn't come to Oregon as often as he would like. When I got here 5.5 years ago, he was working 5 days a week. I understand he's down to 3 days a week in his clinic in Houston, and he loves to work. He is 74, pushing 75. I think he looks like he's about 60. And truth be told, he acts like he's about 30. So that's the secret to longevity, I think. Good wine and a good humor and have fun. I actually grew up in Dallas, Texas. I do not know any Beatles songs, by the way. And I can't imagine that you want to listen to me for the next 45 minutes, but I'll try to make it as interesting as possible. And we'll get to the wine, which is terribly interesting. But I grew up in Dallas. I wanted to be a winemaker. If you can believe it, that many years ago, Texas Tech had a degree, and I went and checked it out. And once I found out how much chemistry was involved, and I was failing chemistry, I decided that was probably not the career for me. So friends said, oh, if you can't be a winemaker, become a sommelier. So I did that for many years. And so I've been studying wine for 30 years. And landing at Alexana was a dream come true. I've been here about 5.5 years. And when I interviewed, I did not remember that I had waited on Dr. Ivana in Houston in a fine dining Italian restaurant. But when I came here and interviewed and found out they had wineries in Napa, Argentina, and I would be dealing with so many different varietals and such high quality of product, I knew this was the place for me. So they hired me, fortunately. And about 6 months later, Dr. Ivana walked in the door and said, I think I know you. And so it was a fortunate mishap. So I think my title is Director of Hospitality, whatever that means. And this is an amazing property. We hope that you'll come visit. Like most wineries, we are reservation only. We are limited on space. And if you can see the lumber behind me, by the way, that's not my Tesla, that's Torii's. It's not for sale, is it?
Sure.
Oh, okay, maybe it is for sale. You can see some lumber behind me. We are under construction. We're expanding our hospitality space, and it is an amazing place to come see. So make sure you call, make a reservation. We typically focus on the Oregon wines, but we do have special flights you can request, and you'll get to taste from Napa and Argentina and possibly Washington. We had a short Washington program that the wines are just delicious. As Jason mentioned, this vineyard is crazy. And that's the way Dr. Ivana does things. Many pieces of our vineyard did not make sense for a vineyard. And that's the way Dr. Ivana does things. So you need to come see it. Just hearing about it doesn't do it justice, but the 18 soils, the famous geologist Scott Burns, who is still at Portland State and rewrote the book Cataclysms on the Columbia, he comes here. He says he's been all over the world. He's a big wine enthusiast. He says this is the most geologically diverse vineyard he's ever seen in the world. So it is a crazy place. Elevation 360 to 640 in less than half a mile. That changes everything. Dr. Ivana mentioned the 11 clones. That changes everything. 18 soils. If you're a farmer, you will appreciate 9 different row orientations. You normally don't pick a piece of land where you have 9 different row orientations. So our vineyard manager had to splice it and dice it into 31 different pieces. They're all different shapes and sizes. And so he essentially makes 31 farming decisions for 56 acres, which is crazy. So Brian Weil, our winemaker, he tries to treat all the Pinot Noirs the same in the building, where some winemakers would have to do different things in the building to come out with different styles. Brian treats all 7 of our estate Pinot Noirs the same. They all get 11 months in oak, and they average about a third new oak. What's different between the 7 wines is where did the fruit come from? So our 7 estate Pinot Noirs are either clone or soil or block specific, and they all taste remarkably different. It it is so much fun to taste through those wines and see how one spot in the Dundee Hills can produce so many different wines. I think Jeff mentioned it. We are live certified, low input viticulture and enology. We are salmon safe. And 2 vintages ago, our vineyard manager decided to cherry pick some biodynamic practices. At this time, we don't have plans of going full biodynamic, but we picked a couple of sprays and we started a compost pile 2 vintages ago. So the compost pile is manure, hay, and some of our pressed skins. And the vineyard manager put it in some places in the vineyard, not all over because of our crazy diversity out there. If you farm the same crop year after year after year, we want these soils to be nutrient deficient because that stresses the vine and it makes for better fruit. The vine puts its energy into the fruit instead of the foliage. But if you keep farming the same crop, at some point, some of those soils are going to get unhealthy. They're going to lose their life. And so that biodynamic compost brings that earth back to life. And Dr. Ivana, when he came into the valley, he didn't want to be that guy from Napa that isn't playing fair with everybody else. And that's one of the reasons he picked solar. He wanted to be a part of the green spirit of the valley. And so it was very important to him. I told you how to visit. I told you we're under construction. Should we start tasting some wine? Yeah. So if you have the Chardonnay, we actually make 3 Chardonnays, and you've actually selected my favorite, especially for summer. Thank you. I don't have any visuals. Very bad, right? So this is 2017 Chardonnay. It gets about, I guess the most important things about Chardonnay is where it's fermented, where it's aged, and how much secondary it gets. And winemakers will say, Chardonnay is made in the winery, Pinot Noir is made in the vineyard. Chardonnay is a bit of an innocuous grape, and left to its own, it's really not terribly interesting. So you really have to ask the winemaker or the winery, how was this Chardonnay made? So our Chardonnay actually is fermented, this vintage, this Chardonnay, 22% stainless steel. And then Brian, our winemaker, does some crazy stuff. It was 36% neutral French oak, fermentation and aging. So neutral, the barrel's already been used 3 or 4 years. 21% once filled, and 21% new French oak. So that ages separately for 11 months, and then it's blended and bottled. Again, of the 3 Chardonnays we make, this is my favorite one for summer. It doesn't get 100% secondary fermentation. So primary turns sugars into alcohol. Secondary fermentation turns the natural malic acid that's in the grape, and it converts it to lactic acid. Malic acid is sharp and tart. Lactic acid, soft and creamy. And that is up to the winemaker unless you want to leave it up to Mother Nature. But most winemakers will control that process. And this Chardonnay only sees, I should know this by heart, this Chardonnay only receives 70% malolactic. So the other 25% still has that sharp, tart, lively acidity. So once blended, it makes for a nice balance. But if you come out and visit, we will be more than happy to let you try the other 2 Chardonnays and just see how different Chardonnay can be. If you've got the Pinot Noir, they chose the 2014. 2014 was, well, easy for me to say. It was easy for the winemakers. It was warm and dry. There was very little farming challenges. Our biggest challenge in the Willamette Valley during the year is humidity. And then, of course, right at harvest is the rain. When is the rain going to come? How much is it going to rain? Brian Weil, our winemaker, will tell you, we can pick in the rain. It's not that big a deal. All of our sorting and distemming equipment is engineered to get rid of excess moisture. So I've been here 5 years, and I think I've seen us pick in the rain 3 times. But we're talking Oregon Willamette rain. We're not talking Texas rain, where I grew up. As I say, in Texas, the weather changes once a day violently. Here in the Pacific Northwest, or at least in the Willamette, it changes about 8 times a day, very quietly. And I get a kick when these tiny slivers of ice come out of the sky and everybody says it's hailing. And I'm like, wait a minute, did that dent your car? Then that's not hail. But I'm from Texas. So the Pinot Noir, 2014, this might be our most complex wine. So this Pinot Noir has all 10 clones, might be a record for an estate. This Pinot Noir contains all 18 soils, all 9 row orientations, all the craziness that we've explained or told you about is in this wine. And again, 14 was warm and dry. The wine is lush, it's mouth-filling. It could be a great food accompaniment, but it's also pretty tasty just by itself. Now, this wine actually gets a little less French oak than our other 6 estate Pinot Noirs, and Brian does that intentionally so that this wine is ready sooner. So the more new oak you especially give to a Pinot Noir, the longer that wine takes to incorporate all those oak flavors so that the oak's not sticking out too much. But as I said, most of our Pinots get about 1/3. This one got 25%. He also constructs it. So we age every clone, every block separate. So 6-8 months ago, we had 500 French oak barrels. Every barrel told us the clone, the block, when it went in the barrel. And then it's Brian and his team's job to decide where those 500 barrels belong in our 7 different Pinot Noirs. So he can, I say the winemaker builds the wine with his palate for the outcome that he wants. So he builds this wine, tasting through 500 barrels, and he wants this to be the first wine. This is the first wine we release in the year. So next February, we will release the 19 version of this wine. And he wants it, again, to be more approachable in its youth. I cannot imagine what else I might come up with. Are we doing Q&A?
Yeah, we're taking questions the entire time through the chat. And one that I just saw pop up, if you'd like to address it, Charles, is talking about cloning and what it means to clone.
Yay, thank you.
Yeah.
So I wish we had come up with a different word, because I think when you talk to someone outside of this industry and you mention a clone, they think that it's something that man has created in a laboratory. And that is not what we're talking about. So all plants are genetically unstable. We believe Pinot Noir to be the most unstable wine varietal. They think there might be 1,000 different clones. And what we're talking about is a genetic mutation out there in nature. So Pinot Noir has more clones than any other varietal. And really the only reason we know that is back in the late 40s, early 50s, the French winemakers in Burgundy were having problems. They thought their wines weren't as good. Their vineyards didn't look as good. So they went to the University of Dijon and they talked to a Professor Bernard and they said, can you help us? He studied their ways, their vineyards for 2 or 3 years. He came back and he said, number one, you're using too many man-made fertilizers and pesticides. You're poisoning your soil. You've got to find a new way to farm. And he said, secondly, I'm looking at this field and yeah, you're right. It's all Pinot Noir, but it's not all the same. So we've got to isolate the plants, decide which ones you like, decide which ones you don't like. And then they opened a book at the French Ministry of Agriculture and it had numbers for plants. And they started assigning the numbers. So that's why you hear 777, 114, 115. The number doesn't mean that 777 is better than 114. It's just the next number that was available out of the catalog. So that way the winemakers could go to the nursery and say, hey, Jacques Tardy has 777. I want 777. So that is really the story of the clone. There is a second definition. If I take plant material from that side of the vineyard and I take it off and I walk over to that side of the vineyard and stick it in the ground, I've just cloned that plant. But mainly we're talking about a genetic mutation. Great question.
Fantastic. That came from Margaret and Scott. Anybody else have any other questions about winemaking in general or anything specific to Alexana? I'd like to hear actually, Charles, a little bit more about just the variety of soils. I imagine the variety of climate with some altitude change. And I mean, I think of, I have not been to Alexana myself, but I think of that property as something that would be absolutely beautiful to live at. And it sounds like it would be absolutely headache after headache as far as trying to farm.
Yes. So, quick history that probably all of you already know, especially since you're in the area. So 50 million years ago, I would have been under the Pacific Ocean. And then about as fast as your fingernail grows, the Juan de Fuca plate went under the American plate, pushed up the coastal range mountains. So you had mountains on this side, but you still had a marine floor. That geologic activity pushed up volcanoes, which pushed up the Cascade Mountain range. So then you had a valley, they say with about a 400-foot deep lake with an ocean floor. And then about 15 million years ago, vents opened up in eastern Washington and Idaho, and lava just came flowing out, and it went through Washington, it came into the Willamette Valley and went out to the Pacific Ocean, but it covered the entire Willamette Valley. So then you had basalt or volcanic on top of the marine floor. And then the famous Missoula Floods that it took a geologist 40 years to prove to the Geological Society that they happened. And if you want a great book, read Cataclysms on the Columbia. It's history, it's sad, it's happy, it's a great book. So the Missoula Flood, there was a glacial lake, Montana, they call it Missoula. It was between Canada and Montana. It was held up by an ice dam. They think that it might have failed 40 to 80 times, sent this crazy 400 tall foot wall of water going 80, 90 miles an hour. It carved out eastern Washington, called the Scablands. It widened the Columbia Gorge, and then it came crashing into the Willamette Valley. Well, typically, that's why below about 350 feet, you've got the ocean floor again, because that crazy flood scraped out the basalt and pushed it out and reopened the ocean floor. So on average, below 350 feet, you've got marine from the Pacific Ocean. Above 350 feet, although floods and earthquakes are not exact, above 350, you've still got the basalt or the volcanic. Our vineyard, the uplifted marine sedimentary soil on the west side, the reason we call it uplifted is it's really too high. It shouldn't be there. But through rippling and earthquakes, it got pushed up higher. So we're in the Dundee Hills, AVA, known for volcanic, but we're right on the edge. Our neighbor is Yamhill Carlton. They're known for marine. So the west side of our vineyard, about a third of the planted acreage, is that uplifted marine sedimentary soil. The block behind us, we actually call the Landslide Block. And I don't know if you can tell, it's a bowl. And geologists say that at some point it was level, it collapsed, it jumbled a lot of soils. And then the east side of the vineyard, which you can't see, is all volcanic soil. So two mother soils, the volcanic, the uplifted marine, but then there's 18 subsets. And depending on what geologist you talk to, there's either 24 or 26 soils in the Willamette Valley. We don't know anybody else that has 18 in one place. And again, Pinot Noir, being that varietal that we believe shows off its place more than any other red varietal, the French call it terroir, it is the most affected. If we planted Cabernet Sauvignon or Malbec or Syrah, which we couldn't probably get right, but if we planted those, it would be more difficult to taste the differences in the soils. But Pinot Noir is very transparent, it's very delicate, and you can taste it. It's very apparent.
Great. That's a lot to take in. A lot to take in after a few glasses of wine as well. Yeah, really interesting. Fantastic.
Well, when we can again, in 2016, I started doing some classes here, mainly for members, but it is open to the public. Hopefully we'll get to do that again soon, especially with our new building. And since Alexana and our company deals with so many different varietals, I get to do classes on, we'll taste 6 Chardonnays from all over the world, 7 Pinot Noirs from all over the world, Bordeaux blends from all over the world. It's endless. We do Rhone blends in Argentina, so I can do Rhone blends. You taste blind, and I try to help the clients figure out, which wine is which. And it's a blast. and hopefully a little educational and mostly fun.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, shall we move on? We tried the Chardonnay, and then shall we move on to the Pinot Noir?
The Pinot Noir. So again, 14. So we tell people that the Willamette Valley typically has less vintage variation than Burgundy, where we think Pinot Noir and Chardonnay were born 1,000 years ago. But we also say we typically have more vintage variation than California. And California would probably disagree with that, because mainly that means we work harder than they do, or the winemakers work harder than they do. But you have to embrace vintage variation, and because you're going to get it. Alexana Wines and the Torii, Adelsheim, our wines are not going to taste the same every year, because we're making them out there. If a wine tastes the same every year, it's being made in the building and it's being manipulated. And those are typically huge production wines that the producer needs them to taste the same every year so that the consumer will trust them. But when you're talking about quality-driven wines like the ones that you're tasting today, you have to embrace vintage variation and learn about it and experiment with it. If you want alcohol that tastes the same every year, just stick to martinis, because vodka tastes the same every year. The 14 is a nice mouthful, because it is a warm year, which means we got more sugar, which means we got more alcohol. All the sugar turns into alcohol. And I say as Americans, we've turned red wine into a cocktail. And that's fantastic, because that means we're going to sell more wine. Europeans still don't drink red wine without food. And the red wine does not come out until the food comes out. They'll drink white wine. And I'm not going to say how many years ago I was a bartender in a fine dining restaurant in Dallas, Texas. But it's Texas, I know. But when you looked across the bar, there were no wine glasses. We were making highballs, martinis. Very few people were drinking wine by the glass. Now, the cocktail craze has returned to us in the past, I'd say 15 years. I could never be a bartender now because they have a bazillion ingredients. But if you walk into a nice restaurant, well, you can't look at the bar these days, but down the road in a few months, if you walk into a nice restaurant and look across the bar, people are waiting or they're having a good time, you see a lot of wine glasses. We are enjoying red wine without food. And the best wine for that is moderate to high alcohol and a fairly young vintage. And I'm talking within 4 or 5 years from the actual vintage, because that wine is going to be mouth-filling. It's going to be soft. Higher alcohol accentuates fruit, so the wine almost tastes fruity. And that's kind of what we like if we're not having food. So this 14 is fantastic with food, without food. The question we get asked almost every day from every client is, how long can I lay this wine down? And we've tried to train everybody to say the same, that that's very personal and that's up to you. And, you know, some people will say, oh, Pinot Noir, that's not age worthy. We can't lay this down. And that means they don't know a whole lot about Pinot Noir. So we're here to educate, but we're also here to sell wine. So I'm never going to embarrass somebody or disagree with them. I've spent the last 30 years looking really surprised with clients, and I'm pretty good at it. Oh gosh, I just gave up my trick. When you come here, okay. Can we reverse that? Is this live?
You're live. Yep, you're
Okay.
live, Charles.
Oh. I'll still look surprised when you tell me something stupid. So Pinot Noir is age-worthy, but it depends on what you want to drink. If you want to taste those bright, fresh, upfront fruits, you better enjoy a Willamette Pinot Noir within 5-6 years of vintage. It may be vintage specific, it may be winemaker specific, but almost any wine, and especially Pinot Noir, after 5 or 6 years, the fruit, that bright fruit, starts to fade. And then you get a little more earthy, a lighter wine. Wines don't get bigger in the bottle. They actually throw sediment and get lighter Pinot Noir doesn't throw a lot of sediment typically. But if you wait 7, 8, 10 years, that's going to be a different wine. And it could be an amazing wine with food. You might not want to sit around and have a big glass of 20-year-old Pinot Noir. But again, it's so personal, and it depends on if you have the right storage, or if you have the right patience. So laying down wine is very personal. And actually, we hope you don't lay it down very often, for too long. We want you to come, enjoy it, and come back and get some more.
Awesome. And Adrian, or maybe it was Margot, Adrian and Margot are together enjoying the tour right now. Say, wow, your Chardonnay is a whole new flavor with a little blue cheese. Very good.
Oh my God, yes.
Margot, thank you for that
Thank
comment.
you. Yeah, wine and food, they completely change. And a lot of the wineries, I don't know about Torii more. I think Adelsheim is doing food plates. I think you'll have to ask them. A lot of the wineries are getting into food pairings. At Alexana, so far we've stayed out of the food business, but we think in our new space we'll probably do some very small plates that are reserved ahead of time. And because, yeah, wine with food, so quick story, I worked for an Italian importer distributor many years ago, and we're talking Italian wine, which is made for food. Again, Italians don't drink red wine as a cocktail, but I was young and I was taking these Italian wines into restaurants in Houston. And when I went into an Italian restaurant with an Italian-born chef, the chef came to the wine tasting and they always brought food. We always tasted the wine with food. When I went into an Italian restaurant with an American-born chef and probably an American sommelier or wine steward, the chef never came to the wine tasting, and we never tasted the wine with food. And this light bulb went off in my head. Especially Italian wine can be very acidic, can be very tannic, and it needs protein. It needs some cheese, some meat, some charcuterie. It totally changes the wine. So thank you, Margot. It's super fun to taste a wine just straight up without food, and then do a little food pairing, because it completely changes the wine, which is a good thing.
You said that it's particularly well paired with proteins.
Animal or vegetable.
Any other sort of guidance along those lines? Yeah.
I think it's super personal, and it depends. I had, again, Texans. I had Texans that would drink, Cabernet Sauvignon with scrambled eggs. They just wanted their big, juicy, high alcohol wine. Typically, lighter wines pair better with lighter fare. Heavier wines pair better with heavier fare. But man, Pinot Noir, that's one of the things I love about Pinot Noir. It is so food versatile. And seafood, meat, poultry, it goes with everything. And, but yeah, and you know what? Don't follow the rules. There is a Masters of Wine that swears you should drink Cabernet Sauvignon with oysters, and I think he's nuts. I won't say his name.
Okay. Yeah, you've already gotten yourself in trouble once today. We don't need to do that again.
I live in trouble.
Won't say it, but it sounds like.
What's that, Corey? You're off camera.
Won't say his name, but it sounds like.
Fantastic. Well, we are moving to the point where we will transition next to Adelsheim. Yeah, Charles, we'll give you a break here, but I do want to
Better
ask.
wake everybody up. You have an espresso?
Yeah, maybe that's the next thing, right? Is everybody fire up your espresso machines and get a little caffeine boost.
Come see us.
Yeah. So absolutely. So folks, I'm very interested in coming out and seeing the property now that I've heard you describe it. It sounds fascinating.
We'll have a blast.
There's a photo in our guide that gives a sense of how the sort of rolling terrain looks as well. And on the Alexana page, You've also got an email address for Samantha. Samantha's been, oh,
Yes, Samantha. Samantha's my producer. She's somewhere upstairs, just like one flight up. Not, you know, don't get too worried. She will take your orders, and that Pinot Noir, that 14, that's a library wine. So the current vintage on that wine would be 18 and retail for 55. This wine is 75 because it's gone into library. And then the Chardonnay you tasted is 35 retail US dollars. For listeners today, 6 or more bottles, if you order, you'll get a 10% savings off of that.
Fantastic. Okay, so yeah, you've got Samantha's email address, which is simply samantha@alexanawinery.com, and the phone number as well. So contact Samantha directly. Anybody who wants to take advantage of that discount and what's available. And do you know, Charles, if you're offering a discount on anything else that's available? I don't myself know. If you have anything else offered special for participants today.
Typically other than the wines that you tasted today, typically our allocation members get some savings. We don't do a lot of outside of that, but hey, if you come see us, make a reservation, we'll spend some time together and we'll talk.
Great. That's fantastic. Charles, really appreciate your participation.
It's fun.
It was a fantastic exposure to sort of the family that is Alexana and the property as well. So yeah, deep appreciation for your participation and Samantha's participation and everybody being involved here. Thank you very much.